me, it was extremely uncomfortable.
I can understand his daughter having a problem with it. It's her father, all right? I get that. But anybody else, go suck it.
Bruce Lee's daughter, Shannon Lee, has once again criticized Quentin Tarantino after the filmmaker dismissed critiques of his depiction of her father in his film and now novel, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In a guest column for The Hollywood Reporter, Shannon Lee urged the filmmaker to take a pass on commenting further about Bruce Lee and expressed frustration with white men in Hollywood trying to tell me who Bruce Lee was.
Could have handled it in a way that was respectful of my father as well as, served his story.
Shannon also allegedly revealed that all the fights she's facing are because she refused to bend over for Hollywood execs. Since the Harvey Weinstein case broke some time back, a tsunami of sordid stories relaying alleged sexual crimes in Hollywood have come to light. And Shannon believes her father's legacy is being ruined because she refused to give in to the industry demands.
I think that the portrayal of him in Quentin Tarantino's film is him being treated the way he was treated by Hollywood back in the time when he was trying to make accurate representations of Asian men in film.
I'm tired of hearing from white men in Hollywood that he was arrogant and an a-hole, the younger Lee wrote in the column, when they have no idea and cannot fathom what it might have taken to get work in 1960s and 70s Hollywood as a Chinese man with an accent, or to try to express an opinion on a set as a perceived foreigner and person of color. I'm tired of white men in Hollywood mistaking his confidence, passion, and skill for hubris, and therefore finding it necessary to marginalize him and his contributions. I'm tired of white men in Hollywood finding it too challenging to believe that Bruce Lee might have really been good at what he did and maybe even knew how to do it better than them, the actress lamented. Shannon had previously criticized Tarantino's depiction of her father in interviews, calling it disrespectful and a mockery of his legacy. In Once Upon a Time, Bruce, played by Mike Moe, challenges stuntman Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt, to a fight and, as Shannon Lee told The Wrap in 2019, comes across as an arrogant a-hole who was full of hot air.
My father was made into a punching bag, she tells The Wrap. He comes across as an arrogant blank who is full of hot air.
My hands are registered as lethal weapons.
I understand they want to make the Brad Pitt character this super badass who could beat up Bruce Lee, she added. But they didn't need to treat him in the way that white Hollywood did when he was alive. Tarantino has defended himself by claiming that Bruce Lee was kind of an arrogant guy. He reiterated that argument during a recent appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, citing Lee's perceived disrespect for American stuntmen, and added, "I can understand his daughter having a problem with it. It's her f***ing father. Everybody else, go suck AD."
I can understand his daughter having a problem with it. It's her fucking father, all right? I get that. But anybody else, go suck it.
In her interview, Shannon Lee said, "Why does Quentin Tarantino speak like he knew Bruce Lee and hated him? It seems weird given he never met Bruce Lee, right? You can imagine by now that I am used to people only seeing one facet of my father and blowing that up into a caricature. That has been happening since shortly after he passed. But usually somewhere in that caricature is some sort of nugget of love for the man and his work. Not so with Mr. Tarantino." She goes on to reiterate her criticism of the Once Upon a Time scene as an uninteresting teardown of Bruce Lee, and urges Tarantino to take a step back. At a time when Asian Americans are being physically attacked, told to go home because they are seen as not American, and demonized for something that has nothing to do with them, I feel moved to suggest that Mr. Tarantino's continued attacks, mischaracterizations, and misrepresentations of a trailblazing and innovative member of our Asian American community right now are not welcome, she added. Mr. Tarantino, you don't have to like Bruce Lee. But in the interest of respecting other cultures and experiences you may not understand, I would encourage you to take a pass on commenting further about Bruce Lee and reconsider the impact of your words in a world that doesn't need more conflict and fewer cultural heroes. After Quentin Tarantino defended his depiction of martial arts legend Bruce Lee in his film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a friend of Lee's is speaking out, helping Shannon in the fight to protect her father's legacy. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, retired NBA legend turned actor and writer, detailed his criticisms of the way Tarantino portrayed Lee in a recent column for The Hollywood Reporter, calling it sloppy and racist. He begins by explaining how he and Lee became friends before they co-starred in 1978's Game of Death, released posthumously after Lee's death.
First trip to Hong Kong with my good friend Bruce Lee, he said, "Come on, we're going to make a movie, you can be the villain." I said, "Sure." Why not? And I flew over to Hong Kong and I was the villain, and that ended up being the last movie that he made.
I first met Bruce when I was a student at UCLA looking to continue my martial arts studies, which I started in New York City, Abdul-Jabbar wrote. We quickly developed a friendship as well as a student-teacher relationship. He taught me the discipline and spirituality of martial arts, which was greatly responsible for me being able to play competitively in the NBA for 20 years with very few injuries. Abdul-Jabbar, who calls himself a fan of Tarantino's films, was disappointed with how the filmmaker chose to rewrite history when it came to Lee's role in his new movie. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood shows Lee, played by Mike Moe, on the set of his Green Hornet TV show, talking about being able to beat Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali, in a fight, which ends up leading to a friendly fight between him and stuntman Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. Booth wins the fight by throwing Lee into a car. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Lee's daughter, Shannon Lee, has called the depiction disrespectful and a mockery of her late father's legacy. And Abdul-Jabbar agrees, going even further in his column.
Bruce's house, Bruce asked me a lot of questions about martial arts. I told him, my dad boxed. And I had to fight a lot when I was a kid in the neighborhood and all that stuff.
Of course, Tarantino has the artistic right to portray Bruce any way he wants, Abdul-Jabbar said. But to do so in such a sloppy and somewhat racist way is a failure both as an artist and as a human being. That's what makes the Bruce Lee scene so disappointing, not so much on a factual basis, but as a lapse of cultural awareness. Abdul-Jabbar goes on to describe how, during their years of friendship, Lee spoke passionately about how frustrated he was with the stereotypical representation of Asians in film and TV. The only roles were for inscrutable villains or bowing servants, he revealed. Asian men were portrayed as sexless accessories to a scene, while the women were subservient. This was how African American men and women were generally portrayed until the advent of Sidney Poitier and blaxploitation films. Bruce was dedicated to changing the dismissive image of Asians through his acting, writing, and promotion of Jeet Kune Do, his interpretation of martial arts. That's why it disturbs me that Tarantino chose to portray Bruce in such a one-dimensional way, Abdul-Jabbar continues. The John Wayne machismo attitude of Brad Pitt, an aging stuntman who defeats the arrogant, uppity Chinese guy, harks back to the very stereotypes Bruce was trying to dismantle. Of course, the blonde-white beefcake American can beat your fancy Asian chop sake dude because that foreign crap doesn't fly here. The interview signs off with Abdul-Jabbar setting the record straight on who Lee really was as a person. I was in public with Bruce several times when some random jerk would loudly challenge Bruce to a fight. He always politely declined and moved on, he reveals. First rule of Bruce's Fight Club was don't fight, unless there is no other option. He felt no need to prove himself. He knew who he was and that the real fight wasn't on the mat. It was on the screen in creating opportunities for Asians to be seen as more than grinning stereotypes. Unfortunately, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood prefers the good old ways. After the Los Angeles Times interview with Shannon came out, Tarantino defended his film by saying that Bruce Lee was kind of an arrogant guy while speaking at a press conference in Moscow. I didn't just make a lot of that up, Tarantino said. I heard him say things like that. People are saying, well, he never said he could beat up Muhammad Ali. Yeah, he did. Could Cliff beat up Bruce Lee? Brad would not be able to beat up Bruce Lee, but Cliff maybe could. If you ask me the question, well, who would win in a fight, Bruce Lee or Dracula? It's the same question. It's a fictional character. If I say, Cliff could beat Bruce Lee up, he's a fictional character, then he could beat Bruce Lee up. Despite fighting to keep the legacy of her father alive, Shannon Lee cheerfully recounts the time she went to a darkness retreat in Oregon. For 4 days, she stayed in an underground cabin in the woods, so dark she couldn't see her own hands. Most people would find this terrifying, but for Shannon, it was liberating, she says. All you have are your thoughts and feelings, and they start to bubble up. So, you get to look at many things, which can be uncomfortable. I came out very energized. The 54-year-old daughter of a Hong Kong American martial arts icon has always been a reflective soul. Her father's death when she was 4 and he was 32, and then the death 20 years later of her older brother, Brandon, aged 28, have made her that way. Talking over a video call from her office in Los Angeles, she describes herself as a seeker who has always been interested in different paths to healing. She was inspired by her father, who was a philosopher at heart and a prodigious journaler, constantly writing down his thoughts and feelings about life and work in an ever-growing stack of notebooks. Her new book, In My Own Process, brings together Bruce's letters, photos, drawings, and poems, all of which show the depth of the challenges he faced, the depth of his accomplishments. It includes essays and interviews with some of his famous friends and fans, including Jackie Chan, Ang Lee, and basketball star and former co-star Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Lee wants people to see that her father was more than just the kung fu guy. Bruce was, she says, a deep thinker, a very thoughtful and forward-thinking person. Bruce remains one of the greatest and most influential martial artists ever. He overcame widespread racism in the entertainment industry to become the first Asian superstar in Hollywood. He fought hard against on-screen stereotypes, refusing to take on any parts he considered racist.
It might sound too philosophical, but it's unacting acting or acting unacting. If
You've lost me.
I have, right? So what I'm saying, actually, you see, I mean, it's a combination of both.
Frustrated with the lack of good roles in the U.S., he went to Hong Kong and made The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and The Way of the Dragon, all huge box office hits. He died tragically young in 1973, 6 days before the release of Enter the Dragon, which would become a global smash. The cause of death was cerebral edema brought on by an allergic reaction to headache medication.
You have offended my family, and you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
Shannon's memories of her father are somewhat hazy. What she remembers the most is his energy. He could play really dynamically. He was a bit strict. I remember the feeling of being with him, the brightness of that, the warmth. The love is so strong. She does have vivid recollections of Bruce's funeral in Hong Kong, which saw thousands of people lining the streets. It was such a spectacle. I just remember this state of dissociation and shock as you're being dragged through this whole procession. Shannon has been the guardian of her father's legacy since she was in her 30s and co-founded the Bruce Lee Foundation with her mother Linda, a former teacher who met the actor when she was a student in one of his martial arts classes at the University of Washington. After his death, wild conspiracy theories started to spread that he had been poisoned by a jealous lover, assassinated by triad members, or had taken a drug overdose. The theories speak to the greatness of his life, says Shannon. When I was a kid, sometimes I would find it annoying when people would say he was killed by ninjas or the death touch, which is a martial arts technique or rival gangs. But now I look at it and go, he was a warrior, and nobody thinks that someone like that should just pass.
When I was a kid, I used to say to people like, you know, when people would say, oh, my dad can beat up your dad, I'd be like, no, but really, my dad can beat up your dad. For sure.
Shannon is gregarious, thoughtful, and chatty, with the most delightful laugh. She grew up in Southern California with her brother Brandon, who was 4 years older than her. Her mother later remarried twice. As a child, she loved to escape into her imagination and would talk to herself. I played a lot of pretend. When I got a little older, I wrote stories. I became an avid reader. While her father and brother were larger than life, she was more reserved. Shannon was close to her brother, who she describes as a big, boisterous ball of energy. He liked to play pranks on her. He was my tormentor. But when it mattered, he was also my protector. If someone was being mean to me, he would step in. When he became an actor, she worked as his assistant on the 1992 film Rapid Fire. He would give advice to me.
Brandon Lee is Jake Lowe. He wasn't looking for trouble.
He saw me watching!
But it found him anyway.
Shannon is a classically trained singer with a degree in vocal performance. She thought about pursuing music as a career, but in the end, decided to follow in the footsteps of her father and brother and become an actor. Her first role, when she was in her early 20s, was in a biopic of her father's life, 1993's Dragon the Bruce Lee story, as a singer performing California Dreamin' at a party. It was sort of sweet, actually, because in that scene, my mom tells my dad that she's pregnant with me.
I'm going to America. French fries. Sky's the limit, that's what they say.
Not a Chinaman's chance. They say that.
She started practicing martial arts in her 20s as a way to feel closer to her father. Bruce studied the style of Wing Chun and went on to invent his own method of martial arts, known as Jeet Kune Do. He created his own art, Lee says, but she felt under pressure to live up to her father when she became an actor. Shannon was mainly cast in action films, playing a sex worker in Cage 2 and a gangster's mistress in High Voltage. Like her father, she landed her first leading role in a Hong Kong production, the martial arts thriller Enter the Eagles. I have never been the same kind of martial artist that my father is, she says. There are very few people who are. It was very hard because people had expectations. They only wanted to hire me to do martial arts action stuff, and they wanted me to be really good. But she wasn't able to commit to her new career because just as she was starting out, her brother died in a tragic accident on the set of The Crow. After roles in Legacy of Rage and Showdown in Little Tokyo, Brandon, who had his father's smoldering good looks and natural gift for martial arts, was on the cusp of stardom when he was accidentally shot and killed by a faulty prop gun, fired by his co-star Michael Massey during filming in 1993.
Early reports said that 28-year-old Brandon's fatal shooting on a movie set last week was an accident, but now there is even talk of murder.
If I had a child, and then for some reason I weren't around to take care of my child.
Shannon's mother called to tell her he had been injured. She jumped on a plane from New Orleans, where she was living, to Wilmington, North Carolina, where The Crow was being filmed. I had a sense that he had died when we were on the plane, she says. Brandon was buried next to Bruce at the Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, Washington. She was heartbroken. She had big plans with her brother. He had asked her to be the best man at his wedding after becoming engaged to Eliza Hutton, a personal assistant. Shannon was planning to move to Los Angeles, where he was living, to pursue acting. We were both really looking forward to being able to spend time together.
Brandon Lee didn't have any children, but he was planning on marrying longtime girlfriend Eliza Hutton this month. That was until tragedy struck.
After his death, she fell into a deep depression. I was struggling and in a lot of pain. In my mind, I kept saying over and over to myself in a silent loop, I can't feel like this. I can't live like this. This is too much. How do I make it stop? Her father's journals had been piled up in boxes and stuffed into filing cabinets around the house. She started to read them only when Brandon died. My favorite quote of his was, "The medicine for my suffering I had within me from the very beginning, but I didn't take it. It just hit me in the chest. It told me, the only person who can solve this for you is you." This newfound awareness helped in unexpected ways. I started to realize that I had been mildly depressed most of my life and had not known it. The death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, who was killed when a live round was discharged from a prop revolver held by the actor Alec Baldwin on the set of Rust in 2021, brought back bad memories of her brother's death. The circumstances are very similar, says Lee. It really just makes you go, why is making a movie more important than a person's life? Recently, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, Russ's armorer, was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Baldwin has also been charged with involuntary manslaughter, to which he has pleaded not guilty and will stand trial in July. Shannon supports the banning of live guns from film sets. I think that is not unreasonable. But if you're not going to do that, then I think you have to put laws and better safety measures in place than what exists currently. Brandon's death was ruled as negligence, and although no charges were brought, his mother successfully sued the filmmakers for an undisclosed amount. 30 years after the film's release, The Crow is getting a reboot coming out later this year, starring the Swedish actor Bill Skarsgård and musician K.A. Twigs. Shannon has seen the first-look images of a heavily tattooed Skarsgård as Eric Draven. I feel like nobody will ever replace my brother in that role. He embodied that character beautifully. No one likes to see someone's legacy brushed over by something else. It's a beloved character, so I understand why they continue to make it. But I think my brother's performance will always stand. Losing a father and then a brother when she was so young was devastating, she says. Their absence in your life is deafening. You're left trying to figure out how to continue. Then there are the moments where you go, I wish that person was here. People often ask questions like, what do you think life would have been like if... I never did too much of that kind of fantasizing because it's not helpful. First of all, it's never going to be the case. I need to deal with what is rather than what could have been. But, processing all of that is life's work. She made the move to Los Angeles a few months after Brandon's death and muddled on with her acting career, but her heart wasn't in it. Eventually, she decided to quit. It was a really tortured time in my life, she says. I was in deep grief over my brother. I was not really able to show up for that in the way that I would be able to now. I was very hard on myself. Shannon was too fragile at the time to handle the endless scrutiny about her appearance and the countless rejections that come with being an actor. If you're not in a good place, it can be very challenging. She was also thinking about starting a family with her husband, Ian Kiesler, a lawyer whom she married in 1994 after becoming friends at university. The couple have a 21-year-old daughter, Ren. Recently, she returned to acting after 21 years in Warrior, the Asian-led martial arts crime drama created from an 8-page treatment by Bruce. Shannon is an executive producer on the show and appeared in a cameo as a grief-stricken mother. It was nerve-wracking, but I really loved it. She doesn't have any other acting projects in the pipeline, but she calls her comeback a gift. She admits that having her life so closely tied to her father's and brother's legacies has been a struggle sometimes, but Shannon is grateful for the chance to express her love for her family. Death has been a very valuable teacher for me. It's taught me to live. When someone you love dies, you're faced with the notion of mortality, and you are forced to learn how to let go. Because if you attempt to hold on too tightly, it will destroy your life. It's a hard lesson, and it takes a long time to get there. But eventually, you get there. What a life she has had. It would only be fair for people like Quentin Tarantino to cut her some slack and let her be. And that's it from us today. Until next time, thank you for watching.